One of the biggest challenges I had when I first started out with the diet, with the OMS diet, and really converting from a meat-eating diet to something that's a little bit more plant-based or wholly plant-based, was missing certain foods. And one of them was a burger, a nice big juicy burger. Certainly vegetable burgers are no problem to find in any health food store, but the problem with those is they often contain many ingredients which are not terribly healthy. It's usually for shelf life, a lot of preservatives, things like this. Even a lot of unhealthy fats can occur in a vegetable burger. As it turns out, a vegetable burger itself is really simple to make. All you really need to do is combine any grain, combine any plant-based protein that you find interesting. Use some kind of binder, usually like a mashed bean or a tofu or a tempeh or something of this nature. Even breadcrumbs work. Working in your spices and some kind of vegetable. And if you have something from each of those categories or most of those categories, the possibilities are really endless in terms of creating your own vegetable burger. Today, I want to demonstrate how to make a tempeh mushroom burger, which is one of my favorites. It looks sort of like a real burger for one, and I think it's interesting because it utilizes a product which many of us are afraid to touch, which is tempeh. And it looks a little bit like this. Now, tempeh is really just soya beans that have been cooked, and they have a live culture in them, and they're formed in this kind of cake. They come originally from Indonesia, and they're full of protein. It's something that's very interesting to work with, so I would encourage you maybe to explore the world of tempeh a little bit more. We're going to use mushrooms. We may use a little bit of breadcrumbs to help bind everything together. We have some red cooked beans that we've already pureed a bit. And we have a little bit of onions and garlic to give it the base, really like any burger. So we're going to get started by cooking the tempeh. One of the problems with tempeh is that it's pretty bland when you just eat it as it is. And so you need to put flavor into it. And that's what I wanted to show here. First thing we're going to do is we're just going to slice this tempeh. Getting a pan hot, and we're just going to use a little bit of soy sauce. Probably about, I'd say 4 spoonfuls of soy sauce is enough, something like that. And the rest we'll just use a little bit of water, just enough to cover the tempeh once we get it in here. And we're going to just poach that tempeh for about 5 or 10 minutes, and that's all that's necessary to put flavor right inside of it. Just enough water here to basically come right to the top of the tempeh, and that's all you really need, and we're just going to let that kind of cook away. And then what I like to do is just give it a little bit of spice. This is cayenne pepper, so be a little bit careful with how much you use. And that's all you need to do. Just make sure before we get the onions and garlic into the pan, make sure the pan is nice and hot, and you can always test that. Just drop a little bit of water into it. And it should just immediately kind of form into a ball, move around sort of rapidly in the pan, and that'll tell you that the pan is nice and warm and ready to go. So we're going to get all of our onions and garlic just finely chopped. Just get them in here. We're going to cook this over moderate heat. We want the onions to take on a slight caramelization here. And again, what's really nice about this method is we're not using any oil at all. We're just going to get a little bit of salt into the onions and garlic. That encourages the water to come out. Helps prevent the onions from sticking too much. So this process will take about 5 to 8 minutes or so before we're ready to move on. Once the onions start getting a little bit of a caramelization and you get some water in here, you get a nice rich golden color just like you would if you were caramelizing them in fat. Right, we're just going to go ahead and get this off the heat now and get it onto a plate. Don't worry about cleaning out your pan too much because we're just going to cook the mushrooms in it right away. And with your mushrooms that you already have blitzed up in the processor, we're just going to go ahead and put all of them in at once. Don't put any water in, but what you can do is put a little touch of salt right into the mushrooms. That should be more than enough. And we're just going to stir this around. Now this will take about 5 to 7 minutes to completely cook down. The water is going to release from the mushrooms rather rapidly. And once that water evaporates, it's really important to just keep stirring the mushrooms as it's cooking, and it takes on a rich, dark color. In the meantime, it looks like our tempeh is just about done. You just carefully lift these out, just pop them onto a plate. You'll notice that the tempeh really doesn't fall apart or get soft. If anything, it gets a little bit firmer, which is not a bad thing at all. Good, the mushrooms now I think are just about ready. The water is completely gone. They've been cooking for about 5 or 10 minutes now. They've taken on that rich, sort of almost meaty color, and that's just what we're looking for. So we're going to get the heat off and get these mushrooms into the same, you can just put them into the same pan as you did with the onions that were cooling earlier. We've got all the ingredients prepared. They're all cooled now. The only thing that remains is let's get them into a food processor, process everything down, build our burgers, and then we'll bake them off. So I start with our proteins first. We're going to go ahead and just get our tempeh in there, into the food processor. Go ahead and get your beans into the processor. And let's just give these a little whirl. And you can see in the processor that once it starts to get to a ball stage and balling up, that's when we can start adding some of our other ingredients. Now this has just basically created a really nice thick paste that's really going to act kind of as our glue for the burgers. Let's get our mushrooms and onions in here. Put a little bit of seasoning in. I use just a little bit of salt. I pop a little bit of cumin in here. We're going to put our parsley. No need to chop it up really. The machine will do that for you. And we'll just go ahead and process this. Good, I think that's looking pretty good. I want to get a good sized bowl out now. Let's get everything out of the processor and into our bowl. You can see the texture here. It's a little bit, it feels a little bit moist, but it's also a bit gluey, which is nice. Don't worry too much about the moisture right now. That's what we'll use the breadcrumbs for. So we just get everything right now into the bowl. And just with a spatula, you can kind of work it a little bit. And we'll start incorporating some breadcrumbs into here. You can use fresh breadcrumbs, you can use dried breadcrumbs, you can use Japanese panko, just whatever you have kind of on hand here that's going to help bind everything together. And remember, what we're trying to create is that same sort of texture, that same sort of feeling that you might have if you were actually working with meat. So, there you have it. And now I think it's just a matter of forming the burgers. I think we'll probably make about 4 out of this bit here, 4 to 6. They make some pretty big sized burgers. And you can just do this by hand. I like just getting them into your hand, rolling them up into a ball, and then just easing them into a nice patty. So it looks like we're going to get about 5.5 burgers here. So if you have an urge for a snack, you got a little one coming also. We're just going to put them onto a pan that's lined with some baking paper. And what I tend to do here is just with a brush, you can leave this part out. They're perfectly okay if you bake them without any oil at all. But I find that it adds quite a lot in terms of not sticking to the paper if you just give it just a light brushing of oil. So, there's our mushroom tempeh burgers ready to be cooked. You can put them in the oven, which is what we're going to do. Pretty hot oven, around 200, 210 degrees centigrade. You can actually grill these as they are, or like I said, you can also fry them in a saute pan with just lined with a little bit of paper. So we're going to get these right into the oven. They go about 15 minutes on this side, and we'll flip them for about another 5 minutes. Good, the burgers have come out of the oven now. They've been here for maybe about 10 minutes cooling or so. What we're looking for is just a nice crispy exterior here, and they're just lovely. You can just go ahead and put these on the grill now if you want, or alternatively, you can completely cool these, freeze them, keep them for some other time, and when you want to reheat them, right from the freezer directly into a toaster, and that's a good way to heat them back up. But we're going to go ahead and eat one now, so I'm going to just peel the burger. And there we have it. We have a vegetable burger, just ready to eat, looking really wonderful and appetizing. And the only thing really we have to do is just go ahead and eat it.